Hi, everybody. Today we're taking a look at a game made by Milton Bradley that came out in 1986. It was the final game of the Games Master series, originally called Shogun, later renamed Samurai Swords, and then finally reprinted as Ikusa. This is one of the very best area control plastic mini extravaganzas ever made, in my opinion. It's set in feudal Japan during the Middle Ages, and it handles 2 to 5 players. Everybody controls different factions in a giant civil war with the aim of capturing enough territories to earn the title of shogun, supreme ruler of Japan. Let me show you how it works. I'd like to begin by admitting that this game is in my top 10 list of all time. So I hope this video does a good job conveying how much fun a person can have with it, straight up or with modifications. Has a lot of fan support on BGG. The file section is filled with excellent underrated variants and alternate rules that not too many people have talked about. So I'll go over some of the best add-ons and adjustments that you can try with this game. All of them are downloadable for free. So even though the game stands on its own just fine, you also have all sorts of materials available to you that can enhance this one-of-a-kind Ameritrash experience. Anyway, as I explain the basic rules, I will highlight some of the interesting features of the game. As always, I'll sneak in little upgrade tips and tweaks you can try that complement the components that come in the box. So I'm just going to refer to this game as Samurai Swords for the rest of the video because that's the version that I own. If you aren't familiar with the game at all, it's superficially Risk-like in its intent. Army units capture spaces on the board with dice combat. You look at this board, however, and you see a beautiful map of Japan divided into 68 different territories. And you notice I have added some features to mine so that I can play a variant that I really like. But normally all the provinces are equal value. And when I want to play standard rules, I just ignore the colored dots I added. More on those later. A player needs to control 35 of these spaces to win. The same winning condition applies in the 3, 4, and 5 player game. If more players are in the game, they simply get fewer territories to start with. 2-player game is slightly different. Each player controls 2 factions at the same time, and the required number of territories each side needs to win is 50. Interesting thing about the 2-player game is that your 2 colors can never actually mix in army groups or provinces. Overall, the 2-player game works okay. Anyway, setup is straightforward. The game comes with province cards. You randomly deal these to players. This determines where everyone starts on the map. The cards themselves are attractive, but they are made with extremely wimpy cardstock. You have to laminate or sleeve here, or they'll wear out in no time. Populating the board is likewise easy. You claim each of your startup territories with a single spearman unit, and then continue with several more rounds of initial provincial deployments. Army group placement follows this, and that completes the setup process. You can move larger groups of units within these army stacks. There are certain limitations to this that I won't get into right now, but it's all sensible. One thing to note is that army groups begin at 1/3 max potential strength, so that's an interesting factor to manage. There is a rule that states nobody can attack another player's armies on the first turn. I should mention something else here also. The original flag art, the stickers for your army markers, are so blah and cheap looking when compared to other aspects of the game. You could go to BGG and print off more attractive flag designs than like a dot or a couple of horizontal lines. Reimagined flag art will make your game look a lot nicer. That's what I use. After all startup units are on the board, a random draw of swords determines the deployment order or who goes first. Speaking of the swords, the game comes with 5 plastic samurai swords. You occasionally draw blindly to resolve most in-game tie results. They have little pips on the blades, so they are basically 1 to 5 value swords. I add a splash of color to the pips because they're really hard to see at a glance. This is okay because a person's hand covers that part of the blade when drawing anyway. The Ikusa edition of the game gets rid of these, and that's unfortunate. I argue they are one of the unforgettable features of the original design. I'm not even going to call them gimmicks. I think the samurai swords are worth the price of admission, considering the namesake here. They're really fun components. So at this point, you might be wondering about how a turn actually works. What is a sequence of events? I believe Samurai Swords handles this with such a cool and easy to understand system. Honestly, for a 1980s area controller, I'd never seen anything quite like it, and it all works so well. You get a number of coins called koku at the start of each turn. The exact amount depends on the number of territories you hold. There's a minimum number, by the way, so players get something regardless of how poorly their war effort is going. Total up your provinces, divide by three, drop all fractions, and that's your income. The koku coins you get are okay. I like this game enough that I'd consider getting actual Japanese coins, not even replica board game tokens for this. It'd be worth it to me anyway. This is an obvious upgrade for this setup. I will get around to it one day. I have some related tokens, but I use them for a variant that we'll see a bit later. Anyway, players assign Koku to 5 different actions to begin each round. And this is all done behind a screen, so nobody knows exactly what anybody else intends on doing on their turn. Players can bid on the turn order, with ties being resolved with a sword draw. Players can bid on a ninja. A player has to actually outbid everyone else to control the ninja for a turn, so ties don't cut it here. The ninja can assassinate an enemy general with a successful die roll, which freezes an entire army group for a turn. And you might think that this doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is. Generals, the daimios, gain experience and mobility as the game wears on. It's kind of like the reward system in Risk 2210 AD. For 3 successful battles, 1 per turn, a general may gain an experience point. And eventually, these points allow for more attacks per turn and greater movement. And this all goes away if they're assassinated by a ninja. It's funny too, if the ninja fails the assassination roll, the targeted player gets an opportunity to turn the ninja against the person who hired it in the first place. A player can also just spy with the ninja, but overall, this piece, the single unit, is just genius for a game of this type. The mini itself is my favorite plastic sculpt ever in any game. It looks so menacing and morbid. I don't know. I just love it. Players get to play it out of turn order too. So if your ally is about to make a move with an army group, you can say ninja and do like a surprise double cross and then pounce on the disrupted army group with multiple opposing forces. And Ninja Strike usually pretends a much larger in game betrayal. This mechanism, though, is so fun you can't even mention samurai swords without highlighting the ninja. The 3 other things you can spend Koku on are mercenary units, hidden Ronin swordsmen, they last only 1 turn, regular army units, and finally fortifications. And I want to discuss the fortification pieces a little bit before we take a closer look at how the regular units line up against each other. So a lot of people online say the castle pieces are no good, not the actual plastics. They're super cool looking. It just that it seems they aren't worth building. They aren't strong enough. They just aren't good enough somehow. And I tend to agree with this assessment. If you build these things, they fall. They certainly aren't strong enough to withstand multiple attacks. You get 4 bonus chump blocker spearmen whenever a castle gets attacked. Likewise, you get 5 bonus Ronin for a fortress, and these guys have to be the first casualties. The official rules, I think, might be off ever so slightly here. Some suggested remedies for this problem that I've seen and tried are giving a castle 5 spearmen in a fortress 6 Ronin, so you would add 1 unit to each upgrade. Adding an extra level or step to the fortification process. Step 1 would be building a base for 1 Koku. This represents a strong point like field works. It adds 4 spearmen. Step 2, for 2 more Koku, remove the base and replace it with a castle and get 5 spearmen and a gunner. Step 3, a final expenditure of 2 more Koku adds a base to the castle to make a citadel, which gains a space 6 Ronin and an archer. Something like that might work a bit better. Finally, you could just delete the fortification bidding altogether. A lot of veteran players do this, and instead they add castle icons on the map to indicate permanently fortified sites. This seems like a reasonable compromise for those who don't like the basic fortification rules. Anyway, moving on. As far as the combat system itself is concerned, no complaints here at all. It's very well done. It runs smoothly. This is the available lineup of units with the cost in Koku and 2 hit values. You roll d12s looking for low numbers. And don't forget, with d12s, it means you have to find a dice tower or a tray. Otherwise, they'll just roll away on you. Ranged units fire at each other first. Hits get removed. Then melee units fight using the same process. It's simple, and yet the mix of unit types is completely original. Name another game like this. Samurai units, gunners, spearmen, archers, all the minis are just so cool too and seem very well balanced. So, with everything I've covered so far, hopefully you're getting a sense of why a lot of people really enjoy samurai swords. However, before I get into some of the excellent add ons and mods you can get that might make this game even better, I would like to discuss something that a lot of people find somewhat problematic. And this has to do with the rules as they pertain to late game movement by army groups with maxed out experience levels. So, as the game wears on, many army groups will gain the ability to move all over the map with elevated experience levels. And this can become a giant can of worms to manage. What if you have three army groups, each moving three spaces before attacking in three different directions, not to mention provincial battles going off all over the place? It can get confusing in a hurry. The game comes with planning pieces to help plot intended moves, but there aren't that many of them, especially if you consider that they're supposed to be shared by all the players. They get passed around, misplaced, and absolutely ratty and worn out in no time. They're just cardboard markers after all. So if you can make color specific planning pieces for each player, you will do yourself a big favor with respect to making your game run more smoothly. Mine are nothing special. I just hand drew arrows with a pen on colored labels that I then stuck on plastic chips. Having these are still better though than shared gummed up set of cardboard tokens. One more thing related to the movement problem, the official rules don't do a great job of highlighting an important concept meant to alleviate confusion related to complicated army group maneuvers. So the rules state that as army groups move through friendly occupied territories prior to combat, they are able to absorb provincial units as they go. However, they can't drop them off as they travel, which on the surface seems counterintuitive. New players will often complain that this makes no sense, and they'll say it's stupid, and there'll be a tremendous urge to just ignore that restriction. The problem is you really shouldn't, because it becomes way too difficult to keep track of what has already moved and what hasn't. And by the time army number two and then army number three passes through the same territory, you'll forget what's going on. So if you just have to house rule this aspect of the game, at least tip over units temporarily after you drop them out of an army prior to combat, so you don't wind up moving them again and again on the same turn. Just say tipped over units can only defend if attacked for the remainder of the round. I understand why this aspect of the game can be confusing. The rules are just like all the other books in the Games Master series. High quality, yes, but also quite wordy at times, loaded with redundant, endless diagrams of examples of combat that, in some instances, bury really important rules like the one we just covered. So make yourself a rule summary. I got Samurai Swords down to less than 3 pages because you won't want to be flipping through 25 pages of diagrams to find one key point about movement if you're hosting a multiplayer game. Now for the mods. There's so many good ones, you'd be surprised. So now I'd like to talk about my top 5 favorite mods for Samurai Swords, arranged by order of fun factor, I guess, even though I like all of them, as well as the base game on its own. Still, number 5, terrain features. At least a couple of BGG users have uploaded high quality blank samurai swords or shogun map scans. I drop these files into a paint program, add some features, and then use Excel to print section by section. So if you want a very minor level up in complexity, why not add basic terrain modifiers? This modified map has some impassable boundaries that create a few interesting choke points. The brown represents rough terrain, +1 penalty to attackers' die rolls, and the green is supposed to be woods. That gives +1 penalties to both attacker and defender ranged combat rolls. I never play on this map with new players. The original one is still more attractive and more fun for casual gamers, but with a group of veteran players, I always suggest something a bit different like this. And I've played on this at least a few times, and it's fun. It's an interesting mod to try. Mod number 4, Cavalry. A lot of people online lament the fact that there are no distinct cavalry pieces in Samurai Swords. In the rules, it says cavalry is abstractly factored into the combat strength of the daimyo piece. Like the game just assumes that everyone knows generals would be mounted with an entourage of cavalry. Okay, well, for a lot of people, that's not going to be good enough. So, how to add horses? There's a huge, long discussion thread about this topic on BGG. A lot of good ideas contained within it. One school of thought is that you got to have mounted archers as well as mounted spearmen to do it right. Okay, but there are simpler ideas that I found that can work too. And I merged a whole bunch of other people's ideas into a simplified horse mod that I can summarize on one page. It looks like this. I borrow Epoch 5 units from Avalon Hill's History of the World. They seem to fit right in, like you can drop them in seamlessly. Sizes and colors match up well and everything. One cavalry unit costs one koku with a 7 to hit value. So expensive, but effective. They have a special ability. A horseman unit in an army or province adjacent to an embattled province or army may lend support. Simply move the cavalry unit into battle. This action simulates the high mobility of the horse. After combat, if the unit in question survives, it may remain in place or return to its site of origin. So, yes, these units may move and fight multiple times in a round. However, you have to be careful using them like this. You could wind up losing a lot of expensive horses this way. Where do they fit in the order of battle? I create an extra step. You can see the revised chart here. Resolve ranged, then resolve mounted, and resolve foot combat last. You can download a battle board from the file section on BGG. If you like the horse mod, put the file in a paint program and alter the board so it supports this mod. Overall, I found if you play these cavalry rules, players will buy them. Usually not too many. The special abilities do get used mainly in support of provincial battles, but it's still a good variant. Mod number 3 is one by SDI Barar. I don't know what that means. Anyway, his Tenka mod is just awesome. It got posted 20 years ago, I think, and I liked it so much, I permanently altered my map to accommodate his revised rule set. It's really fun to play. The information package is just 2 pages. All provinces have an economic value ranging from 1 to 3. Economic values are represented by the number of colored dots on the game board. This information also appears on a reference map. During the collect koku phase, you total the number of dots and divide by 5, and then drop all fractions. And that's the number of koku you get. However, only the provinces with red dots actually count towards victory. In my game, they contain little Tenka credits because only these areas have cultural or political value to affect the rule of Japan. You need 12 Tenka credits to win. Yamashiro has 2 Tenka credits because that's where the Imperial Palace is located. So in this version of the game, there's always a terrible dilemma to manage for every player. Do I take frontier territories for economic reasons, or do I try to seize power sooner rather than later? You get the idea. It's still tons of fun. At first, we worried about getting unfair initial deployments with this scenario. A couple of times we adjusted the initial setup. I remember after dealing cards, but eventually our group just said, let's just go with it, see what happens. Have somebody start with most of the valuable territories. So what? Then have the have not powers reluctantly cooperate to bring down the leader, only to then backstab each other in a desperate attempt to seize power. You can get shorter games with this mod as well, so it's a lot of fun. Mod number 2 is another great idea created by a user named Stinger, a.k.a. Mike Montessa, I believe. And this mod adds Imperial regalia to the game. I actually adjusted it a bit for my group, but I give this guy all the credit for the idea. The rules can be summarized on 2 pages. Basically, add 3 tokens to the game. I added a 4th one. Anyway, these represent Imperial regalia, and possession of these items increases your claim to rule Japan. So there's a sacred jewel, a spirit sword, magic mirror. I added an ancient spear. The point is, the possession of each of these counts towards provincial totals. So, for example, the spirit sword is worth like 5 provinces on its own. So this hardware must be fought over and contested at all costs. In my version, if you include the Imperial regalia, a player must also hold Yamashiro and have a fortress built there in order to ultimately win the game. The regalia travels around the board with specific daimios, so they become targets, and their regalia is captured when they get defeated in combat. Moreover, this mod comes with really cool optional rules you can add to really flesh out any story elements related to royal artifacts. You can have mystical powers attached to each regalia. The holder of the magic mirror can use the ninja to spy on multiple players, and in turn, they cannot be spied on. The holder of the spirit sword gets to attack die with the daimyo who carries it, etc., etc. It's just so cool. You can also have rules for lost or stolen regalia, whereby you set aside a random province card, put a token down in it with like 6 or 7 Ronin bandits inside a castle. So players have to recover them instead of starting with them. You can try so many spin-off ideas with this rule set. It's ridiculous. And I didn't know this initially until I looked into this online. It's even based off actual Japanese royal artifacts. So I think this was such an awesome idea. And finally, my very favorite mod to use with samurai swords are the strategy cards, known as Senryaku cards, originally developed by SDI Barar again. These things evolved a lot over time, I noticed. Initially, they were just black and white text. Now they have great graphics and cool thematic ideas. Print and play them, and that's all you do. You can deal a few to each player at the start if you want. I don't do this. I simply award strategy cards for 3 contested victories in a turn by a player, sort of like what you would see in Risk. The cards add stuff like diplomatic marriages, hostages, duels, peasant revolts, shinobi warriors, ninja bodyguards, siege cannons. And I don't want to spoil any of the details here. I encourage you to check them out for yourself. But in a word, fun. Seriously. Sadly, I only covered a small sample of what you can add to samurai swords. I think there are 300 plus discussion threads you can read online at BGG about this game. Some people paint up their minis. I knew a guy who bought more ninja units and painted one white, another one red, and then there was like this whole rock, paper, scissors shadow combat system going on in the background with ninja warfare. There are coastal China maps, different tactics cards, blueprints for the island of Hokkaido, pretty much anything else you can think of. So lots of stuff to explore with this game. It's been this way for a while, and just to prove how truly old school I really am, the first person to make a post about samurai swords on BGG was me. It really was. 22 years ago, I left a session report in the file section, and it's still there. And I remember it was me and one other guy in January of 2001, I believe. And those are the only 2 contributions for the longest time. And now look at it. So I'm not saying I was the first person to ever play this game. I'm just saying I was trying to tell people how good it was from day one. I remember we would even have traditional Japanese folk music going on in the background as we played this thing. It was just really funny. So it sounded like this. So overall, Samurai Swords is great. I have to say this, however. It's a mean game. The meanest game, in fact. I'll turn that off. In my experience, it's the only time I've ever seen a game generate real world heat between friends. So you have to play it with people who are mature enough to play the colors, sides, or their characters, and not actual people at the table. Some of the mods discussed earlier actually help to alleviate some of the tension and backstabbing inherent in the base game. They can provide players with plausible deniability, excuses or reasons for making horribly treacherous decisions that sink other players, and the mods can end the game without player elimination being a factor. So that's good too. Anyway, in conclusion, I argue the old MD sets, the earlier editions with the bigger box, the gaudy 1980s colors and styrofoam inserts are worth getting still. If you like area controllers and have the right group of people, you got to try this game. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more content coming soon.